This is David Taub with GVWire.com. I'm here today with Supervisor Henry R. Perea, candidate for City of Fresno Mayor. Supervisor, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, top of the campaign. How will you improve public safety?
Well, I mean, there's no question that I think when people look at my credentials, having been a police reserve officer for the city of Fresno for 15 years, I understand what it's like to wear the uniform and be in a patrol car and patrol and keep our neighborhood safe. So I have the kind of background that brings me to City Hall that will show that in my career as a councilman as well as a board of supervisor, I've been very proactive in making sure that our law enforcement service has always been strong. So I think there's no question that it's time to shift resources back into neighborhoods because people want patrol officers responding to their calls when they call. So we're going to do that by reallocating resources within the police department today to move people that are behind desks back into patrol cars.
Do we have a number? Are you going to try to hire more cops, put them on the streets?
No, the strategy initially is not going to be to add more officers, only because we know that if you add 200 more officers, for example, that's $20 million. And there aren't those types of resources. I think the smart move is how do you use what you have now in a more effective way? So I think moving police officers that are not in uniform back into patrol cars, that's the first step. And that is already happening based on the messaging I've been making in the campaign. But I think the other is I've already met with Sheriff Mims, and with the 750 or so officers that Fresno PD has and the 400 officers that the Sheriff's Department has, we're talking about how do we bring our forces together to start patrolling the Fresno metropolitan area in a much different way. So
Well,
I think
that's been talked about for many years by many different politicians.
Yeah.
And nothing has really ever been able to collaborate between the city and the county. So
here's
what
the
are you gonna-
difference.
yeah, what are you gonna do?
Here's the difference. The difference in the discussion has always been is how do you consolidate two entities into one? That's where it breaks down. What Sheriff Mins and I are talking about is how do we share resources? So in essence, she keeps her deputies, the city keeps its police officers, but what strategies do we use to bring them together so that we police our community more effectively? That's a different conversation, and she's on board and ready to do that.
All right, another top issue is campaign, the problem of water in northeast Fresno. How would you solve this problem?
Well, I mean, one, we know the problem's already there. It's been created for the past 12 years out of lack of, I believe, of city leadership and responsiveness to the community. But we are where we are. So I think on a go-forward basis, what we need to do is, number one, ensure that those residents, and every resident in Fresno has a safe, clean, reliable water supply. So we continue working on the chemistry, making sure that the water is properly going into the system. With the Southeast Fresno plant going online in the next year and a half, we have to ensure that with that water going into that aging system of infrastructure with about 70 to 80 years old, it has to be done right. Otherwise, we're going to have the same problems there. So we make sure the chemistry is right. We make sure that we do proper continued notifications to the residents to make sure they are tested and their water is safe and their families are safe. And then moving forward, we know we do have an issue in the city. We know that because of the lack of proper oversight, that water did go into homes and did ruin their pipes. So there's going to have to be some level of discussion with the residents, pulling back on the lawyers, because I think when you involve lawyers, it gets more complicated and more costly. So we sit down with the residents, we talk to them what an equitable solution would be, and then we move forward with helping them.
So would under your administration, the city be willing to pay to help fix these pipes, dig things up, and put new pipes in?
Well, I mean, that could be a possibility, because we already know the city has, in many of their comments in the media, they've pretty much already admitted there's some level of responsibility that they have. I think by a councilman putting $750,000 on the table at City Hall saying we need to use some level of money to help these residents, which I believe we do need to help them. I think just by those two actions alone, the city has accepted some level of responsibility and liability and put money on the table. So I think at this point we have to help in some meaningful way, but we can't break the piggy bank either, because it's the Fresno taxpayers that would be responsible for it. So we have to find that middle ground where everybody wins.
So how would you evaluate Ms. Swearingen administration's response? I mean, it took a while for complaints to finally filter to the right people.
Yeah.
Let's say that this does happen in Southeast Fresno when that new water plant goes online, that they have problems with the water. How would you handle it if somehow the complaints weren't getting to the right people and if they finally did? How would you handle a similar situation if it happened again?
Yeah, well, under a Perea administration, it wouldn't happen, because I think at some point the buck has to stop somewhere, and it stops at the mayor's office. So I think if you look back at the past 12 years and when you see the narrative that the city's trying to create right now saying, well, on January 5th, we all woke up and found out that, oh my gosh, we have a problem. Well, no, that's fantasy. I think the bottom line is there are a lot of folks over the past 12 years that City Hall knew about this. Some chose to do nothing about it. And it is where it is. We can't change the past, but we can change the future. And I think what we do on a go-forward basis is just make sure that the mayor, through the city manager and the department heads, are paying attention to the very critical services that they're providing to these people. Because I think this is a classic example of, in 2016, I mean, providing a safe, clean, reliable water supply should be a no-brainer. But obviously in the city of Fresno, it became a problem. So I think we fix it, we go forward, and we make sure it doesn't happen in Southeast Fresno.
Now, speaking of water in a more general sense, what are your plans to increase Fresno's water supply and help get some of that Delta River water continue to flow down here?
Yeah, well, I think the first order of business, we have to understand that Fresno's water supply are two sources. One is an underground water supply, and the other are two contracts that we have with Friant and the Kings River. And those are contracts, so which means on a dry year, we're not guaranteed that we're going to get 100% of that water, which in the last 2-3 years we haven't, which is why we've pumped so much from the underground and we're having problems now with our aquifer. So my strategy as a county supervisor that I'll carry over to the city is that we have to build Temperance Flat Dam. We have to have storage so that on the wet years we have about 1 million gallons or 1 million acre feet of water that we lose to the ocean because we can't store it. So we need to build that dam, and we are in that process of doing so, securing the money, so that on the wet years we can store that water, we can replenish our underground aquifer and move forward. So I think that's the piece that we have absolute control over, and we should make that our number one priority. The Delta, big issue too. We need to get that water, but you're talking about the federal government and state government that has more of the decision making around that. So I'm going to spend my time on the things that I can control directly, and that's building Temperance Flat.
Well, you have connections to Sacramento. So, some of the Sacramento leadership in the Assembly and the Senate have supported you. Would you be able to use that relationship that you've built with them to help Fresno water situation?
Oh, no question. No question that we have the contacts in Sacramento and in Washington. But you have to remember, there's a whole different political dynamic that we've seen in play there about the issue of water, the issue related to the Delta. And not to say we shouldn't engage as a city as much as we can, but I think the best use of our time as a community, because we can control the timing and the building of Temperance Flat Dam and the accessing the resources, in this case the water bond that the California voters passed. So there's about $1.5 million in play there that we can acquire to build our dam. If we can secure that money this year and then move forward with working with Washington to get the rest of that money, which is about a $3.5 billion project, then we're moving towards building the storage so we can kind of create our own destiny in this valley.
So would you be willing to be a vocal defender of, let's say, it always comes, fish over farmers, and obviously that means water for the farmers and the surrounding area and for the city of Fresno. Would you be willing to be a vocal supporter, even if that does go against environmental concerns and some views in Sacramento and Washington?
Yeah, well, no, I always have been a supporter. And I think that's where it comes to balance, which is where my strength is. You find the balance. I think too many times, and why we haven't gone really anywhere, is because people take opposite polar positions, and I think they spend more time figuring out how to fight each other as opposed to how to work with each other. So there's no question that we need more water for the urban users, for the farmers, and we do have environmental uses and purposes for water. So it's why can't we all get in the same room and figure it out? And I think that's been the problem right now, is people have just been too polarized in the discussion.
All right, moving on. Doing business in the city of Fresno. We've heard from you, from Lee Brand, from it seems like every mayor candidate, they're going to come in and make it streamline the process, make it easier. You said so much yourself. So what are some specifics you're going to do to make doing business, getting your proper licenses, building easier in the city of Fresno?
With all of the challenges that the city has, honestly, I think that's probably one of the easiest to solve. And I agree with you. I mean, for years people say, well, we're going to be more business friendly. Then 8 years later, you're not. I always go back to leadership. It starts at the top, and I think that's the beauty of the city of Fresno's strong mayor form of government. When you have a top CEO, which is the mayor, who controls the resources, over 3,000 employees, and pretty much hires and oversees the department heads that are in that organization, shame on that person if they can't fix the easy things. And in my mind, when you say we are going to be business friendly, we're going to have a permitting process that gets people from A to B in a specific period of time, if you can't pull that off, then you don't know what you're doing. So I think what we do is we hire the right people, you start holding people accountable. I think what we do is whether if you're building a fence in your backyard and that should be a 2-day permit, or if you're building a housing development and that's a 3-month process, I think what the city of Fresno needs to do is say, if I don't get you that permit within the 2 days or the 3 months, you're getting your money back on your permitting process. That changes the dynamic of how people think, how they perform, because I guarantee you, as a mayor, if I get that report at the end of the month saying we had to give back X number of dollars because we didn't hit our timelines, somebody's going to be held accountable for that.
Would you be willing to make a change in the department head if those goals are not being met?
Well, I've messaged very strongly in this campaign that with the exception of the police chief and the fire chief, I will be interviewing every department head for their positions, because they're going to have to buy into the vision that I create and share with the city council and come to agreement with. And once we're lockstep on that, the department heads have to absolutely be on board with it, which is why, again, I've messaged that I'm going to re-interview everybody for their job, for the exception of those two, because it's important that we're all rowing in the same direction.
Would you be willing to retain city manager Bruce Rudd?
Well, Bruce Rudd is retiring from the city, so I've known Bruce for many years. I think he's very capable and has done a great job for the city, but I know he's ready to move on, and I support him in that effort.
And do you have people in mind who you'd want to be your city manager?
Yes, I do.
Want to share?
No.
All right. Another area that's obviously a concern of Fresno and the voters, poverty. What would you do? What policy would you put in place to raise the level of prosperity for all our residents?
Well, there's no question that government is going to have to work very closely with the business sector to change that dynamic. But understanding too that government can't do it by itself, nor can the private sector, nor can the other elements of government like the education institutions and everybody else that's involved. So, I think the smart strategy moving forward is how government partners its resources, intergovernmental, as well as with the business community, to get the outcomes that you want. And one example here, excuse me, in just 2 weeks ago, speaking to Dr. Castro at Fresno State, he's very excited about what's happening in this community and the things that he's doing at the university. But his ask to me was, when you're mayor, he goes, I believe it's time for the university to step out even more, work with other educational institutions, the city and the county, and start aggressively dealing with the issue of poverty. Because he sees it at the university. I mean, when you think about our university having a food pantry because a percentage of their population is hungry, we have a problem. So I think when we start working together, combining our resources and dealing with all the socioeconomic issues related to poverty, when we start increasing the employment base, when we start having healthier people, healthier babies, when people are going to school not hungry, I mean, it changes our dynamic. So there's no question poverty is a big issue here. Diversifying our economic base is an absolute priority. We have to go and be bigger than the ag economy that we have. That's important. We have to maintain it. But we know that during times of recession, when the Bay Area and the LA area are recovering, we're 2 or 3 years behind that because we don't have the job diversification that we need so that people are working. So it's got to be a top priority to put people to work.
So what kind of industries would you try to recruit to Fresno, perhaps in the Bay Area tech sector or LA?
Yeah, well, I think the tech sector is a real possibility. I happen to be a real strong supporter of high-speed rail, and I know that now with the line going to the Bay Area, when you can get from Fresno to the Bay Area in 55 minutes now, it changes the dynamic of how industries in those areas think about Fresno, because that's one of the biggest challenges, getting in and out either on our freeways or through the airline sector. So you're talking about 3.5, 4 hours, and that doesn't work for them. But we're already receiving those types of contacts out of the Silicon Valley, where people are saying, hey, now it makes sense for us to possibly have some type of our manufacturing or other facilities in Fresno or in the Valley. So
what would your pitch be? You got a meeting with Google or Yahoo or Facebook. What would your pitch be to say, hey, build your next facility in Fresno?
Yeah, well, I think the pitch is easy because I think now that they see that the transportation issue is pretty much not an issue, and when you talk about businesses that do 5 to 10 year projections and planning, the easy sell is they know they're out of land. in the Bay Area, for example. And when there is land available, it's almost cost prohibitive for them to buy in the large enough quantity that they need to build whatever they're building. So now when you look to Central Valley, it's the last growth region in this state. So land is abundant, it's reasonably priced, and now they have a situation where they can have an industry here or part of the industry that they can commute back and forth on a daily basis to get to work and then be home in time for dinner. So it just changes the whole dynamic. So it's going to make, I think, easier for the Central Valley to sell itself to other industries.
Okay, parks and green spaces is an important issue to a lot of people. What's your plan to increase parks and green space in Fresno?
Well, I mean, the challenge with parks and green space is always, obviously, when you're building you can make that part of the requirements and then make those parks and green spaces self-sustaining as time goes on. When you look back in time, Fresno is a great city. There's a lot of good things happening, but we have a lot of parks that are in disrepair. And it's very challenging then to find, one, the resources, and two, the space to build new parks. So I think the challenge going forward is we have to make sure that the city park master plan is completed in a timely manner. And hopefully that'll get started after the first of the year, we'll get it done. But then I think the commitment of the city has to make is, it's always based on priorities, but I think the parks that we have now are in disrepair, and we have to move resources now to go back into those parks, repair them, bring them up to speed, staff them again with city staff, and make them real amenities that the neighborhoods today can use, which are, they're having a problem using them now because they're just in such a disrepair.
Well, how much of a priority in your budget would you make the park budget?
It would be a top priority. It'd be high. I mean, no question that public safety is going to be a top priority, but livable communities is going to be very important, because that's one amenity that when business comes and looks at any community, they want to see what are your amenities that you provide your community. So parks are going to be high.
Are there other amenities that the city's lacking that you think need to be increased or improved?
Well, I mean, I think other amenities that we have to look at are how people move other than a car around the city. So I think we have to increase our bike paths, the opportunities for people to move in that type of capacity, as well as public transit. And I know that that's a big issue in this country. I don't think people see public transportation right now as being worthy of public investment. So right away people turn to, well, it has to be subsidized. Well, if you think of it logically, our freeways, our bridges, our road systems are 100% publicly subsidized. And I think we're all okay with that. But I think we haven't risen to the level where we see public investment as something that's worthy of that same type of support. But I think moving forward with the fact that we're going to have more pressure on us to clean the air, to be more environmentally conscious, I think we're going to see more of a move to create the types of opportunities for people to get out of their cars and use public transportation or use their bikes. But I think us as elected leaders, our job is not to tell you how you're going to be moving, from point A to point B. Our job is to give you options, and I think we can increase those opportunities for all our residents.
So let's say you got a grant for X $1 million. Would you rather prioritize that and say widening one of our major roadways, Herndon, Shaw, or would you rather put that money in something like BRT?
Well, it depends on the source of funds and if there's any strings attached to it. A good example.
Let's say you choose. What's your type of priority? You got a couple $1 million. Are you going to spend that on improving roads, or would you spend that on transportation?
I would spend it on transportation, creating more opportunities for people to move in different ways.
All right, we spoke with general parks before. Let's go to one specific park, Chuck Jones Park, and the Fresno Grizzlies. You've mentioned before that you were interested in reinstating their $1.5 million lease. Is that feasible given the finance of the Grizzlies? Their attendance has dropped each year for the last 10 years. So is really doubling their rent from what is currently being paid really a feasible option?
Well, I mean, I think you need to go back to day one. I was part of the team that built the stadium, that negotiated the deal with the team. And what I can tell you is at that time we had, and I believe we still have, the best AAA stadium in this country.
I agree.
And we also had the best lease arrangement in the country. Because historically, you have municipalities that pay the lion's share of the cost of a stadium. But at that time, we said, no, it's going to be a 50-50 partnership if we're going to do this. And the ownership of the Grizzlies at that time agreed to that. So when you have $1.5 million being paid by each party on a $3 million a year debt service, I think a deal's a deal. And I think Lee Brand in 2009 made a mistake. He made a tactical error when the Grizzlies came and said, we can't make this payment, so we need to reduce the payment. Well, I mean, I'd like to reduce my house payment too. And,
People do refinance mortgages.
Well, yes, they do. But this was not a refinance. This is saying, I don't want to pay this bill anymore. So will the taxpayers pay more money? And I think the easy solution, which is what I think Councilman Brand and the folks that worked with him at the time did, is they said, yeah, we'll shift $750,000 of the debt, stadium debt, to the taxpayers. Well, that's 7 cops. By making that decision, he took 7 cops off the streets. So, and I think that's unacceptable. I think what he should have done, and what I would do, is say, this is a partnership. This is something that really hasn't happened between the city and the Grizzlies. And don't get me wrong, I'm a very strong supporter of that stadium and of the Grizzlies and them being here. But I think what you do is the conversation, instead of saying, I can't pay my bill, is what can I do to help you be more successful? What can I do to help you market that in a far different way so that we're bringing more venues into that stadium so that you can crack your nut? But if you think about it, if their payment is $1.5 million, just look at the naming rights alone. That's $1 million a year that they get. Well, that's
expiring next year, and
there's still several years left to that, and it's going to continue to have naming rights. And I think the bottom line is this. Like anything else, we all make decisions and choices in our homes of what bills, in what order we are going to pay our bills. And I think somewhere down the line, paying the city of Fresno has been the last choice of who they're going to pay. So I think the discussion shifts back to, no, we're the first bill that you're going to pay, but we're going to work with you to be more successful so that you're not only going to pay your bills, but you're going to make the money that you, obviously they're a business, they want to make a profit, and we're going to help them do that. But shifting the debt back to the taxpayers was the wrong decision to make, and we're going to fix that.
Now you say, what can the city do to help them more? And don't you think the Grizzlies have been asking that question themselves for the last 10 years? We can both agree they've done a great job in marketing.
Yeah.
And yet the attendance, unfortunately, has not shown an improvement.
Well,
don't you think they've done all they can do? So what are you going to do differently?
Well, what's different is this. The Grizzlies have been working in isolation of the partnership that was intended with the city of Fresno. Because remember, that is not just a baseball stadium, it's a multi-purpose stadium. It was designed to have concerts, it was designed to have soccer games, it was designed to have community events, and everything in between. And yes, I left the council after the stadium was built, so I wasn't there to participate with it on a day-to-day basis, but my observation from the outside looking in is I never saw the city of Fresno step up and be the partner that it should have been to help the Grizzlies be successful. See, that's the difference. There's never been the partnership. So I think when you have a multi-purpose stadium, if you have a mayor that's focused on creating that partnership, and if you believe in the vision of downtown, you're going to wake up every day and have the right team in place to work with the Grizzlies to bring those venues in. Because now just look at soccer alone. When you bring the right soccer teams here, you have 17,000 people in that stadium.
But you can't have the Mexican professional soccer teams play every weekend there. And that's kind of a once every month or once a quarter thing they do. They've tried everything you've mentioned, soccer, football, concerts, and it just hasn't panned out. So I'm not quite sure what's going to be done differently in the future that hasn't already been tried in the past and not worked out.
The difference is the partnership. As I said earlier, the Grizzlies are working in isolation of the partnership that was intended to occur between the city and the Grizzlies. That hasn't happened, okay? So I think when you're right, you can't have a soccer game there every week or every month. But when you add in the baseball games and you add the synergy of a soccer game, concerts, and other venues that'll be coming in that will be revenue centers for that stadium that aren't there today, the numbers add up. That's the difference.
Would you be willing to push doubling the rent back to the original amount if it means business detriment to the Grizzlies?
Well, it's interesting, the psychology of your question, am I going to double the rent? Okay, I'm not doubling anything. I'm asking people to go back to what they agreed to do, okay? So I think when you ask people to go back to what they agreed to do, it's one thing to say just do it and you think your job is done. No, the job isn't done by just making the statement you're going to go back to paying what the original deal was. I think what makes it successful is saying, how do we work together so that we're going to go back to everybody paying what they were supposed to be paying and doing what they were supposed to be doing. I think the doing that what they were supposed to be doing is the fact that the city of Fresno has not participated in an active way with the Grizzly ownership to make them successful. So, I think it was a false argument when they said, well, if you don't cut our rent in half, we're going to go away. What a lot of people don't know is the Grizzly ownership may go away, but as the deal that we made is that team is tied to the stadium. So the ownership may leave, but the team stays. So then, of course, the task of the city at that time, if they left, would be for the city to find a new owner. But the team doesn't go away.
I'm pretty sure that you don't want to be making pitching change decisions. Henry,
well, I'm a pretty good ball player. I think I could make some pretty good changes, but I don't want to be the coach.
A lot of people are uncomfortable with the city taking over the team.
Yeah.
I just don't see that working, do you?
That's not the point. The point is the city was sold a bill of goods in 2009 when they were told, if you don't lower our rent, the team is going away. So you understand the difference there? Mm-hmm. The team is tied to the stadium. So the ownership may go away, but not the team. And nobody wants that scenario to play itself out. But the fail-safe there is that if that scenario is going to occur, then the city has to go into an immediate mode of finding a new ownership, for that team and that stadium. So that would have to play itself out. But the point is, I don't think we'll get there because when I take office in January, what's going to happen is that's going to be one of the first calls that I make, and I'm going to sit down with the ownership, and it's not going to be an adversarial position, but it certainly is going to be understood that we're going to go back to the original deal. Then the question is the timing of going back to that deal. It's not going to be the next day because I understand that there are financial challenges there. So my strategy is going to be, how do I help you be more successful? It's going to be a true partnership, and we're going to make it happen.
All right, moving on. Right, the latest poll from ABC 30 came out, shows it a virtual dead heat in this race. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, we know when it went from 5 to 2 that it would be competitive. You have 2 competitive candidates. So ABC did a poll about 5 weeks ago. This is a 5-week follow-up, and you're right. From their perspective, it's a dead heat. I can tell you from our perspective, it's not. We are leading this race, but the one nugget that we took out of this poll, though, which was consistent with their first poll, is that 79% or so of their respondents were from a landline, which means that we're going into homes. And the portion of our population that has landlines are your senior citizen, your more high propensity voter that votes by mail. So the good news in that is it tells us that the work we've been doing in Northeast and Northwest Fresno has been effective. We are penetrating because that's an older demographic, a more conservative vote, and if you're breaking even with a candidate on that demographic, you're way ahead of the game because once we start our Get Out the Vote campaign in another week or so, that we're going to ride into victory.
Right, well, a simplistic election strategy, get your base to the polls.
Absolutely.
Your base, probably Latino voters, Democratic voters. So what are you going to do to get those groups that don't always show up at elections, get them out there?
Well, they show up on presidential elections, and I think what we have found in this race is we had a percentage, we had a goal that we knew we had to penetrate in Northeast and Northwest Fresno, and we've already exceeded that goal. So we know we're going to get more than our lion's share of votes in those 2 sectors, and we know that as we go through the rest of the city, we're going to break every demographic from the young voter to the Latino voter, African American, you name it. We're going to have it strong behind us. So, but of course, you don't take anything for granted. You have your ground troops out there, which we do every day, and we're going to be harvest that vote.
How would you rate the performance of Mayor Ashley Swearingen over her administration of the last 8 years?
Well, I think she's done overall a lot of the things that she wanted to do. I think she created a distraction for herself when she ran for state office. I think what she did is she created a 1 to 2 year gap where she really wasn't in a position to lead the city because she was running for another office, and I think that created some of the slowdowns that she had in implementing the Fulton Mall, the BRT, and what she's trying to do with slumlords right now. But it is what it is. I think she did the best that she could. She's left a few good marks on this city, and I think as a mayor, there's some projects that she started that I will finish and make sure they're finished on time and within budget. All
right. Would a theoretical Mayor Perea ever welcome a theoretical President Trump at the airport if he ever comes to visit Fresno?
Of course. Of course, you respect the position. You always respect the position.
All right, so a couple more questions. In California, Prop 65 and 67 deals with the use of plastic bags. Many cities have banned them. Would you ever support banning plastic bags in the city of Fresno?
No, no, I wouldn't. I mean, that to me, if the state's going to deal with that type of issue, then so be it. Or if the voters want to vote it on initiative, then so be it. But I'm not going to be distracted by issues that aren't doing the types of things that we need to do in Fresno to improve the quality of life and make this more of a livable community, bring more jobs, make sure that it's safe for its community, and give us just good curbside appeal so that when Fresnans wake up every morning and come out into their city, they're proud to see what they see.
So plastic bags at the grocery store are okay with Supervisor Perea?
I'm okay with them.
All right, finally, describe the state of our city at the end of your first term.
Well, I think we're going to see a city that's going to be an all-America city again. When I was on the city council working with Mayor Patterson, it was a good feeling to see how government and the private sector and the community at large were all working together with one goal, and that was to win the All-America designation for our city, and we did. And even though I'm proud of my city, and I think there's a lot of great things in Fresno, there's a lot of things that have slipped. And just one good example is when you drive down the freeways, I think it's an embarrassment. But that tells me you have leaders that have lost focus and are not keeping an eye on the ball. So I think when Fresnans wake up after my first term, they're going to be proud when they go out their front door, get in their cars or the bus or whatever it is they're doing. They're going to see a safe, a clean, a vibrant city. They're going to see change. They're going to see a lot of positive change.
This is Supervisor Henry Perea. He's running for City of Fresno Mayor. Make sure you vote November 8th or whenever you get your vote by mail ballot. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.